Tennessee Life is sponsored by
Mid-South Sewing is an authorized brother dealer and repairs all brands of machines. Mid-South Sewing, known for their many fabrics, classes, and individual instructions. Classes on sewing and embroidery machines, software, sergers, and quilting. Mid-South Sewing, Knoxville and Murfreesboro.
Tennessee Life is also brought to you by Next to New, an upscale consignment shop serving Knoxville. nexttonewknox.com. And by The Flower Pot, for over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations. knoxvilleflowerpot.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Coming up on this edition of Tennessee Life, the finger styling, along with faith, heart, and soul, come together to make the music Doyle Dykes is known for. He talks to us about his very first guitar and the people who inspired him along the way.
For me, it was Chet and Merle Travis and Jerry Reed. You know, I just loved that little thing.
Before artists went to Nashville to record their songs, record companies set up their equipment in the mountains of Tennessee to seek out talent. We talked to Bradley Reeves about Knoxville's rediscovered St. James Sessions.
You know, I have to say I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I had never heard of these recordings.
Tennessee Tunes, next on Tennessee Life.
Thanks for joining us for this musical edition of Tennessee Life. I'm Vicki Lawson. It's not every day that when you hear a guitarist, you can practically hear an entire orchestra from one instrument. But that's the talent you get when you listen to Doyle Dykes play his famous finger-picking style. His musical career is what first brought him to Tennessee many years ago, but a love for the state has kept it his home base. Doyle Dykes brought his guitar and pulled up a chair to talk to me about his musical beginnings and how his faith has always been central to his music. Doyle Dykes, thank you for spending time with us and bringing your guitar. What was your path to Tennessee?
Well, of course, music. I mean, I started off years ago when I was a kid and always dreamed of going to Nashville. When I was just fresh out of high school, I was with J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet. And a couple of years later, I was with Grandpa Jones. We just loved Tennessee, so I moved up to Nashville. And then, you know, life goes on. You have kids, moved back to Florida, and then we were talking, and my wife said, you should be playing music again. So we moved back to Nashville and stayed there several years. When our kids were in college age, we decided to move to Cleveland, thinking it would just be something we'd do for a little while and probably move back to Nashville. But we love Cleveland, and we've just stayed there all these. We've been there over 20 years now. So.
What are your earliest memories of music or the guitar?
Well, my dad was a guitar player. He played an old gold top Gibson guitar, and it was a Les Paul. And we'd go to church, and they would sit my brother. You know, we had 2 chairs in between us, and they'd stand us up in a chair, and Dad would go. I woke up this morning feeling fine. I woke up with heaven on my mind. And that was the kind of stuff we did.
So your faith has influenced a lot of your music.
It goes all the way back, yeah, especially to my church. And my mother's brother was also a great musician and one of the finest, and respected by Roy Clark and even Grandpa Jones. And there is music on my mom's side and my dad. And my granddad was our choir director at our church, getting back to the church thing. I can't really separate my spiritual life with my music. It's all part of the same thing. I really became a Christian, really got saved. That's when you know in your knower that something happened, that there's a difference, and it really changed my life. And even though I was only 11 years old, I raised my hands to God and said, God, give me a job to do, and I'll always tell people about you. And I don't mean it's just like an instant. He hit me in the head like, you know, you're going to be a guitar player. But it was a very gentle persuasion, and very shortly after I started playing the guitar. And just a few months later, my granddad said, well, Doyle's going to play a song. And I got up, and that was the first song I ever played at church. And it's I've Been with Jesus. And I remember when I did this, I remember praying, "Oh God, help me! Here it comes, F," which is very. And but that was my first solo, and I never looked back. And a couple of years later, we had a sailor that came to our church, and he went up to my dad and he said, "Can I play your guitar?" And he started doing it. And I thought, that's what I've been hearing Chet Atkins, and my dad always had Chet Atkins records and Merle Travis, and that's the way he's doing that. So I ran to my mother and said, "Can we have him over for dinner?" His name was Barry Lackey. I'll never forget him. And he came to my house and he showed me this just basic little finger style, and then a little Merle Travis. And so I learned that from him, and the year before last I was inducted into the National Thumb Pickers Hall of Fame with Tommy Emmanuel, in fact, Chet Atkins and Merle Travis and so many others, Jerry Reed. And the first guy I called was Barry Lackey. We've stayed in contact all these years. And
let's go back. Tell me about your first guitar.
my first guitar was a silver tone. It had strings about that high off the neck. And I remember a busted key. It fell against the wall, and I cried. And I showed my dad, and he and my mom were thinking, Doyle really likes the guitar. And he picked me up. I was walking home from school. He said, "Get in the car, son. I got your guitar fixed up." And so he takes me downtown, and he's talking to the owner of Paula's Music, Fred Paula's in Jacksonville, Florida. I'll never forget it. He said, "Well, son, look around." And I'm looking at all these teardrop Voxes and 335 Gibsons and Fenders, and it was amazing. I'd never seen all these Les Pauls and L5s, and I went, wow, these are real guitars. Never seen anything like that. Of course, Dad always had nice guitars, but I'd never seen that many. And he said, "Well, come over here, son, we have a guitar for you." And I walked over, and I was expecting to see my little silver tone guitar, and they opened the case, and it was a brand new J45. I still remember the smell of that guitar. When you see the value in something, you will invest in it. It doesn't matter what it is. And my parents saw the value in my music, and they invested in it. And it changed my life.
Who were some of your biggest musical influences?
Well, of course, Chet was, I listened to him every day. Merle Travis. I mean, most kids would go home and try to learn the latest, Eric Clapton lick or something, But for me, it was Chet and Merle Travis and Jerry Reed. I just loved that little thing. It's like just so much punch and power. They were all a little bit different. Merle Travis. But they're all piano players on the guitar. Here's Chet Atkins. See the difference? And they're all good. They're all great, but there was such a difference in their playing styles, and I just gleaned off both of those guys. But I can't limit myself thinking that there are only 6 strings on a guitar. If I'm playing "How Great Thou Art," at the end of the song, I'm thinking of an orchestra, like a drum roll. And then timpani.
That's phenomenal that you could be a whole orchestra just in that guitar.
And there are only 6 strings, 6 notes. You don't think that way, and you don't limit yourself. And I think that's part of life. We shouldn't limit ourselves either.
When people ask you what kind of music you play, what do you tell them?
Fingerstyle guitar is very eclectic, and I'll say I play everything from U2 and the Beatles to Wabash Cannonball to How Great Thou Art or the Lord's Prayer. I said, there's no limit to what you can do because it's just an instrument. You're playing, I sing a little here and there, but most of it, the voice is my guitar. And I've never been in a box of one style. Sometimes I admire guys that do. They're bluegrass or they're this or that. I've never been in that. But in the last few years, though, fingerstyle guitar has sort of become its own genre.
What would you say are some of your most well-known songs?
Probably Jazz in the Box. I would do little things that are a little bit different, you know. Things like that, and string bends. And in fact, I have a thing on my website that teaches Jazz in the Box, because there's so many little areas and that are sort of signature licks and different things that I do. People say, well, how do you do this? Well, I'll show you.
And when I do that, I let it ring out and don't touch those first two strings.
Well, I learned that from James Taylor. He was showing people how he plays those great songs he does, and nobody plays like he does, and his is very clever the way he does it. And I thought, well, gosh, that's a great idea. I could do that, you know, and why not share and give back what you learned? My mind went back to Barry Lackey. I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for a sailor coming over and showing me how to play a few things, and how hard was that to do, you know?
As far as Tennessee goes, would you say you're a regular at the Grand Ole Opry?
I don't play the Opry as much as I used to. I mean, I'm very busy too. I'm on every year, you know, at least once or maybe 2 or 3 times. So it's been a part of my life since Grandpa Jones. And then I left for a number of years, never thinking I'd ever do that again. And then back since 1995, 96, I've been at least a regular guest on there. So they're like family to me. I love the Grand Ole Opry.
Tell me more about your family.
Well, I have a wife of 42 years. I married my high school sweetheart. We got married in 1973, and now we have 4 children, 3 daughters, and a son. And Heidi, Holly, and Haley are our daughters, and then we changed that with Caleb. Said no more of that, Heidi, you know. And so we changed that with him. But he plays guitar too, and they're musical. My daughter, Heidi, and well, at this time my wife and I only had 2 children. I came in from a trip very late at night, and she said, "They're yours, have fun." And so we played till about 2:30 in the morning. And I usually told them a story or said a prayer. It was too late, so I just said a little poem prayer. And Holly was asleep, but Heidi, the oldest, she was 4. "Daddy, do you think God would bring me something?" And so I knelt by her a little bit. I said, "What is it that you want?" She said, "I'd like to have a rose." And I said, "Well, why do you want a rose?" She said, "Because they're so pretty and I've always wanted one." And I'm thinking all those years, you know, she was 4. And so we asked God for a rose. I didn't think much about it. The next night, our little special time, I told them a story. And we started to pray and we joined hands. And Heidi started to cry. And I said, "What's wrong, Heidi?" And little puffed out lips, "How come God didn't bring my rose to me today? You think he forgot?" "And what do you say to a child?" I said, "Well, we didn't mention the color of that rose." I thought was, you know, pretty clever. And she said, "Well, I was thinking of a white one. Did he need to know that?" And I said, "Well, maybe he did. You know, maybe we should be specific." I didn't tell anyone about it. I just played the small little church that night. On my way, I kept thinking about that little white rose. And so I was putting my guitars away, and this is about 20 or 30 minutes after everyone had left. And this lady kind of burst through the back doors. "Are you Doyle Dykes?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, God told me to bring you something from my garden today." And it was wrapped in foil, a little package. And I said, "Well, I'll enjoy eating this from your garden." And she handed it to me, and she says, "Well, I wouldn't eat it." She said, "You better look at it." And stood there watching me, and I peeled the foil back, and so help me, Vicki, there was one little white rose. And it just hit me like, wow. I got teared up, and I couldn't hardly talk to her. I said, "This isn't mine." She says, "Well, God told me to bring you that, Brother Dykes? And I told her the story. I said, well, this belongs to my little girl. And we were praying, and I told her the story, and she said, well, that's nice, and just walked out like it was nothing. I got the rose home to Heidi the next day, and the same little package, kept in water, of course. And she ran out to meet me, and I wasn't even out of my van yet. And I reach over, and she grabbed me around the neck in my seat, and I reach over on the dash, and I gave her this. She said, he brung it. And she said, just like that, it's my rose, isn't it? And she ran in the house, and she looked at it. She says, it's white, just like we asked. And she ran in the house, Mommy, God brung my rose to me today.
Would you share a couple of your songs with us?
Absolutely, Vicki. This is actually the song I talked about a while ago and wrote for my daughter, Heidi. This is White Rose for Heidi. And I marched her down the aisle on that song. My brother played that on the piano, so it's a very special song to us.
That's very special. That was beautiful. Such a wonderful tribute. Thank you, Doyle Dykes, for sharing your Tennessee story with us today on Tennessee Life.
Thank you, Vic.
Thank you. Long before you could download your favorite tune and Nashville was the music hub it is today, record labels traveled the country making field recordings of regional musicians and artists. Two of these recording sessions happened at a hotel in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. We talked with Bradley Reeves and Eric Dawson about the newly rediscovered St. James Music Sessions.
Knoxville during the 1880s, 1890s was still pretty much of a rural place. You had people coming down from the mountains looking for jobs. You had the steel mills of Lonsdale. You had a lot of textile plants over around the Park City area. It was still had a lot of rural character, a lot of rural flavor to it, and a lot of musicians, a lot of music everywhere. There were the fiddling contests on Market Square. Back then there was a great big a building called the Market House that actually had an auditorium, and folks would come from miles around to participate in these fiddling contests. Not only was it a rural place, it happened to be an urban area at the same time. So you had these two factions going on at once. You had the opera and you had fiddling contests. Very unique city, Knoxville, during that time. The St. James Hotel was part of that. The hotel itself was originally built in 1905, and it was known as the Van de Ventnor. It was touted as a modern European fireproof hotel with 150 rooms, each including its own bath, which was quite special.
Brunswick Balk Hollander Company out of Chicago, they were primarily known for making billiard tables, but they were manufacturing a lot of different things. And in the 1910s, they got into the record manufacturing business. Now, before the Knoxville sessions of 1929, which were the first of two, there were about 120 location recordings that had already been done. And these were companies in New York and Chicago. Really, there were only three: OK, Columbia, and Victor. And what they decided is that instead of having artists come up to New York or Chicago to record, they would go out in the field and record them with portable recording equipment. And they went all over. They went over the South, the Southwest, recording a wide variety of music. And in 1927, the famous Bristol sessions happened. Victor went to Bristol, Tennessee, and recorded what became known as the Big Bang of country music. Columbia Records saw this and thought it was pretty interesting, so they went down to Johnson City to do something similar. Well, by 1928, Brunswick Vocalion had got into the field recording business, so they chose Knoxville as sort of like the next logical hillbilly or old-time music location to record in. Through the railroad, they came in with several tons of equipment. These recording apparatuses were very heavy and very expensive and difficult to move around. They set up in a radio studio that was in the mezzanine of the St. James Hotel.
A lot of furniture stores sponsored a lot of the early recording sessions to sell phonograph records. I mean, back then, that was a real piece of furniture. If you see those wind-up Victrolas, they're beautiful wood pieces, and well, you got to have records to play on these. So a lot of furniture stores started sponsoring these recording sessions. In the case of Knoxville, it was the Sturkey Brothers department store down in the 100 block of Gay Street. They really went into the business full force. They were distributors for the Vocalion record label. They put out an ad. You can still see it today in the microfilm. It says, "Come to make records." And they invited all musicians, anyone, to come to the St. James Hotel and participate in recording sessions. It was quite a big deal. It was run by a fellow by the name of Richard Voynow, who was one of the heads of Brunswick Vocalion in Chicago. And Voynow himself was a former jazz musician who played with various jazz bands during the 1920s, which may account for the different styles of music found in these sessions. Bill Brown had participated in the Columbia Johnson City sessions before, and he was great to have as a producer for these recordings. He, of course, was Atlanta-based, but he was familiar with Southerners and the South, shared the same sense of humor. He was able to draw out musicians during the recording sessions, make them feel comfortable, make them feel at home.
So Richard Voynow and Bill Brown arrived in Knoxville a few days before the sessions in August 1929 to do a little scouting and try to find some talent for these sessions. And about 25 artists were picked. The majority of the artists were from Knoxville and East Tennessee, though you did have people coming from as far away as Kentucky, from Middle Tennessee. The Knoxville acts have been people like the Tennessee Ramblers, the Rigel's Fountain Cityans, Tennessee Chocolate Drops, Leola Manning, Odessa Chancellor. From Middle Tennessee, you had the Perry County Music Makers. Uncle Dave Macon came. Uncle Jimmy Thompson came to perform as well.
Some of the early recordings by Will Bennett, sort of a mystery man. He cut two really interesting blues recordings, including one that would be a standard later, Railroad Bill.
Railroad Bill done took my wife, threatened on me that he would take my life. Now I'm gonna ride my railroad bill.
Maynard Baird and his Southern Serenaders recorded a total of 6 jazz and pop sides. They were one of Knoxville's really popular house bands. They played all over Knoxville and all over the South on tour, and at certain points played on the same bill with folks like Rudy Valley. They were that popular.
Some of these recordings have been available since the 1960s, when a lot of sort of 78 collectors were really getting into that and finding these. And then there was another sort of spurt of interest maybe once, you know, the internet came along and people were able to do more research and track this stuff down.
A lot of the recordings sort of fell through the cracks. The sessions had ill timing due to the Depression. Hence, very few people were buying records. No one could afford them. And the records themselves were pressed in very, very small numbers. Today, very few of them survive. They just didn't make it. And in certain cases, there's only one copy on the planet.
Well, and it's also really interesting that a lot of people who recorded at these sessions would continue to have careers in Knoxville and beyond after that. You know, obviously Howard Armstrong's probably the most famous person that recorded there. But a lot of these other performers also went on to perform in WNOX and radio stations around Knoxville. They would tour and travel.
Their legacy, it's a story of Knoxville. It's a story of Knoxville's community, Knoxville's musical history, our regional cultural heritage. That is the legacy of this music. It's carried on music from 85 years ago and captured it for posterity today.
We hope you've enjoyed the stories behind the music that we brought you on this edition of Tennessee Life. I'm Vicki Lawson. See you next time.
Tennessee Life is sponsored by
Mid-South Sewing is an authorized brother dealer and repairs all brands of machines. Mid-South Sewing, known for their many fabrics, classes, and individual instructions. Classes on sewing and embroidery machines, software, sergers, and quilting. Mid-South Sewing, Knoxville and Murfreesboro.
Tennessee Life is also brought to you by Next to New, an upscale consignment shop serving Knoxville. Next to new Knox.com. And by The Flower Pot, for over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations. KnoxvilleFlowerPot.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.